everyone, and welcome to Where is the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. My name is Jane, and I am with Sabrina today, but we also have a special guest. Her name is Lesley. She is a good friend of ours, a previous coworker, and we're so grateful we met her through work. But she's also super impressive. She was the founder for Commonwealth Coaching, which is a financial coaching service for young professionals. And she's in business school and she's working on just amazing projects. So I'm going to create some space and let Lesley introduce herself.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Jane and Sabrina. It's so great to be here. And I just love the topic of this podcast overall. As Jane mentioned, I'm a former founder in the financial wellness space, started a company around financial wellness for young professionals and just trying to get a solid foundation for those that might be coming from backgrounds where wealth wasn't established in the family beforehand. I also previously worked in tech, and I'm currently a full-time MBA student. In my MBA, I'm focusing on product management and entrepreneurship, and actually launching a few exciting new projects in personal finance around behavioral psychology and action-based approaches to actually getting good at money, which I'm sure we'll talk about in quite a bit of depth. But beyond that, live in Chicago, tea lover, book lover, travel lover. I don't know what else I could say, Jane, but hopefully that gives the audience a sense of who they're talking to.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really comprehensive. And we're really excited to have you because you are so educated and passionate about personal finance and starting early in your life. And I think that's a topic that we really wanted to pick your brain on because I think for people kind of younger in their 20s and maybe even 30s, I think a lot of people struggle with both being educated and actually taking action on building wealth and personal finance versus enjoying your life early, being able to travel. And you mentioned, you enjoy travel. So maybe the first thing that we kind of kick it off with is, if you're talking to somebody in their 20s, what would be the top 3 things that you would share or recommend to somebody in their 20s when it comes to setting themselves up for financial success or stability?
Oh, okay. Starting with the heavy hitters. I love it. I think there's so much nuance regarding where someone's starting off from, but my favorite 3 tips really start off with acknowledging, number 1, that personal finance has not really been sexy or cool for a while. This is not a topic that a lot of people proactively want to explore for themselves. And I get it. A lot of that is because the content out there is super dry, not at all customized. And quite frankly, it's hard to see how these actions that feel restrictive can actually contribute to feeling like you're creating a better life for yourself. So my first tip for anyone who's trying to figure out how to get their finances in order is thinking about your personal finances as designing your lifestyle. That's really all it is. We're not talking about making yourself so restricted that you hate your day to day. We're not talking about cutting things out of your life that bring you joy. And we're also not talking about just following trends because it's the cool thing to do or it's the thing that your uncle or whoever said you should do. We're really using your finances, which is almost the primary language in which we kind of interact with the world around us. We're using your finances to design your lifestyle. So whatever lifestyle you're trying to develop for yourself, you can feel empowered to do that using the resources at your fingertips. So that's biggest takeaway. If you stop listening to this podcast right now, I hope you just take that with you because personal finance is so much more than just numbers and building Google Sheets and tracking your spending. It's really trying to design your lifestyle and being kind of the owner of that. The other 2 tips that I have is, one, there's this kind of theory out there of paying yourself first, which I really subscribe to myself. If you haven't heard of it before, paying yourself first means putting money aside and using your financial resources for things that really matter to you before anything else. That might sound counterintuitive, especially when we all have things like rent, phone bills, car bills, internet, etc. Those are absolutely within Maslow's hierarchy of needs and should be allocated for accordingly. But it's quite powerful to say, you know what, instead of thinking about my grocery bill and my gas bill and my rent first and foremost, I'm actually going to think about the financial goals that I have first and foremost and try to build the rest of my life around that. Something I see a lot of young people almost feeling restricted by is they feel like they should be trying to get the nicest place or the place right in the middle of the city. And they end up overpaying for rent and overpaying for living expenses, where their goals are actually to eventually like be completely, I don't want to say nomadic, but really be flexible from a travel perspective and be able to be in a lot of different places at once. If travel, for example, is your number one goal, pay yourself first. First, think about what is the money that I need to be able to travel in a way that sits well with what my goals are in life. And then from there, work backwards to see, based on that goal, how much can I afford for rent? Based on that goal, does it make sense to have a car? Based on that goal, am I going to try to find like a family phone plan with friends, or am I going to be able to afford the like ultra deluxe free international data phone plan with, T-Mobile? I don't know what it is for you, but really focus on paying yourself first and prioritizing your goals ahead of what you think can sometimes feel like just keeping up with the Joneses. The last point I'll make is that within the world of personal finance, growing up and just my background specifically, I'm coming from a first generation immigrant background. So I did not have a lot of familial resources when it came to learning about kind of navigating money and kind of finances in the US specifically. Money and personal finance is a continual learning journey. And for a lot of us up until our 20s, the main part of finance that we have practiced is spending. Like that is the main muscle that we have practiced. We have not practiced or worked out or developed any other muscles when it comes to reading financial news or investing or saving or understanding that there's a difference between good debt and bad debt. So there is a little bit of an element, a little bit of an uncomfortable push that needs to happen in your 20s where you start to become comfortable with what you don't know and you're open to continuing to learn, not just right when you get out of college, but like really for the rest of your life. I think the onset of crypto and NFTs and just in general, kind of the blockchain ecosystem that's really emerging right now is a perfect example of that. There's massive wealth to be amassed as well as considered through some of these more non-traditional resources. And it's the folks that not necessarily are the smartest or the richest or the most capable, but the people that are willing to dive in and willing to learn about these resources and these spaces that are benefiting and able to reap the reward of this new asset class. So just in summary, Jane, I know that was quite a bit, but tip number one is personal finance is just designing your lifestyle. Make that mental switch as soon as possible. Number two is pay yourself first. You don't have to keep up with the Joneses. You don't have to have everything your friends have. And it's not from a place of weakness. It's actually from a place of strength that you get to decide what's most important to you and prioritize that with your spending. Then last thing is we all do need to start developing that continual learning mindset. And if you can start there, I think you'll be in a really good place, not only in your 20s, but in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond.
Lesley, I'm so glad we have you on. I feel like you've just dropped so many gems, and thank you. I learned a lot just from those 3 tips. And I love how you talked about like paying yourself first. I think that's something that a lot of people forget because they just get overwhelmed with, well, I want all the things, right? I want a nice house. I want a nice car. So I like how you say focus on your main priorities first and then work your way backwards from that. That's super actionable. So thank you. Building on that a little bit, so for me, when I came here to the US, and I think a lot of people can relate, but this word like investment, and you touched on it a little bit, but a lot of people fear that word, right? So Les, what would you say to someone that has in their head that like investing is too hard, or that I could never learn how to do it, and that it's only for rich people and who have extra money, et cetera, and that it's scary? How would you sort of ease some of their concerns in that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to be honest, those that maybe don't know me personally that are listening to the show, I find myself as a very like risk averse person. Like in my life, I'm planning like plan A through D, like really struggle sometimes with the idea of uncertainty and risk. And I think when people hear about investment, they hear about risk, they hear about uncertainty, and they also hear about this almost entirely new world with an entirely new set of rules that you aren't exposed to until you feel like you should be doing it and you should be diving in yourself. So the first thing I would say to that person is I really, really empathize with where you're coming from. I can't say I totally understand because everyone's coming from a different place, but that feeling you're experiencing is one that I've felt and one that I know a lot of other people have felt too. So, first and foremost, have to acknowledge like we're all starting from different places. With regard to investing, I hate the fact that investing feels like almost this like very bro-y culture where you have to be like a Wall Street guy to be able to invest and like know the right treasury stock to buy and at the what time, and you have to be a penny stock trader. And like I'm throwing out all of these terms not to confuse anybody, but because that's what it feels like when you walk into a room and people are talking about investing and maybe you haven't thought about it before and you're just bombarded with like all of this jargon, all of these opportunities. And usually the call to action is, so you should invest right now. Okay, no, like that is not a good situation. That would stress me out. My anxiety would be on 10. Like that is not helpful, especially for people who are new to the investment space. And especially for, speaking for myself, for women who often feel like this space is dominated by men and dominated by, to be honest, rich men. So with that being said, I would just use this opportunity to educate the audience that there is a wide array of what it means to invest. Quite simply put, investing just means you put your money into something that will hopefully make your money grow while you don't really have to do too much. That could really be anything. It really could. It could be like, using that really broad definition of investing. It could be setting up a like online class and spending $100 to put that online class out there on the internet and then reaping the benefit of that online class and the benefit of your time. You've invested your time, your money, your resources, and your brand and expertise to develop that online class, and hopefully they'll reap a reward. But typically when we talk about investing in the finance sense, there are a couple of different asset classes that we're talking about. It's either kind of a more traditional security or stock or bond. We can also talk about investing in currencies, which includes the foreign exchange market, as well as currencies like in the crypto space. We could be talking about investing in real estate or other like physical assets like land or jewelry or art. And then finally, we could be talking about investing in companies, specifically not necessarily on the stocks and bond side, but really on the early stage investment and kind of crowdfunding side of things. So along all of those asset classes of how to invest, there are a wide range of kind of levels of involvement. If you're new to investing and just want to kind of dip your toe in the water and don't want to spend a ton of time trying to learn and understand, all the technicalities of investing, it's a good time to point out that I probably spend, maybe I should be embarrassed to say this, but I probably spend about 15 minutes every 6 months on my investments. Really, truly, like I am not a person who enjoys being in the weeds on the stock market and trying to understand every nitty gritty detail. I'm more of a person who likes to put things on autopilot. I like to live my life on the side and make sure money is growing with me. So along that spectrum, there are really, really kind of low effort ways to invest, which I'm happy to talk about more. There are also really high effort ways to invest. But often when you hear about investing, you think that there's only one way to go about it. And that's just simply not the case.
Yeah. And that's super relatable too, especially, you've listed so many different ways to invest. And I think there's also a lot of new ways that are emerging as well, where people can kind of start to educate themselves on that. So it is really interesting. And sometimes it can be a little bit daunting, but I think you're exactly right that there are a lot of resources out there, and investing could and should probably look different for different people, depending on where you're coming from and what you're working with. So yeah, that's a really good perspective around this.
I wanted to add something, Jane, because yeah, there really are so many resources out there and so many avenues to invest. And I just wanted to leave this group with one of the best pieces of investing advice that a mentor has given me, which is kind of in relation to all those different like asset classes that we talked about earlier, early stage startups, publicly traded companies or more traditional financial securities, real estate, and then currencies. Across all of those asset classes, you do not need to be an expert in all four. In fact, you should pick one that really interests you for whatever reason. It could be like this new like NFTs thing, which is like super interesting, especially from like an art and design perspective. It could be real estate, which is kind of the one that I've picked, which I love. And, I'm trying to live out my HGTV dreams day by day. But pick one of those areas that really excites you and automate the rest. And I think that is a really helpful entry point to someone who maybe isn't investing at all, where you feel like there's so much opportunity and there's so many resources and everyone's telling you like, educate yourself. But like, where the heck do you start? So along those four categories, if there's something that's jumping out to you, I'd start there on the research front, see if you can get your feet wet there and then try to automate the rest. Some of the best advice I've gotten from a mentor.
And that's super fair too, because as I was thinking through all these different options, I think by thinking about all of them, it felt very overwhelming. But that breakdown is so important. And I think some people enjoy the more tangible side of things, which maybe is like real estate, right? And some people enjoy the more like the new and up and coming, which maybe is NFT or crypto, right? And so I think there's just, again, depending on what is going to make you the most interested in the learning process is probably the best for you to spend your time and your efforts on. So appreciate that tip there. And Lesley, one thing I really want to dig a little bit deeper, because you said paying yourself first is one of the kind of recommendations that you gave. I think for the three of us, we're very lucky and we're very privileged to have money and wealth, right? It doesn't have to just be dollars, but we have wealth to work with. And there is, I'm fortunate enough to be able to pay myself first, but I know a lot of other people, have loans, have other things that they have to worry about. Do you feel that as people are assessing their priorities and choosing to pay themselves first, is there any sacrifices that they have to make? How can someone, or someone who may be struggling financially best optimize for situations like this? Or what type of sacrifices can people make that is reasonable, to optimize their personal health or financial health?
Yeah, it's an incredibly good point and a wonderful reminder at all times to be able to kind of check where I am, where we are from a privilege standpoint, and be able to help to educate and empower those that might be in different circumstances. I can absolutely relate to that. And I have two somewhat separate, but still connected thoughts on one, what it means to pay yourself first if you're really in a space of survival. And then two, what sacrifices you might make in either situation, whether you feel like you are in that space of survival, or if you feel like you're in a space where you're trying to really optimize and further evolve where you are currently, both of which are extremely different kind of day-to-day situations. So it's a great point that you brought up, Jane. First, with regard to paying yourself first, one of the things that I always encourage my previous clients to focus on, and was really important, especially for folks that were struggling with debt or potentially struggling with solid income or struggling with other things such as childcare, which in the US is just absolutely atrocious in terms of cost. And we can probably spend a whole other podcast talking about that. Paying yourself first in that context often looks like being able to show up as your best self to try to get yourself out of that situation. What do I mean by that? Concretely, I used to have clients who were really, unfortunately struggling with the credit card debt cycle, and credit card bills were piling up to the point where they were surpassing the cost of rent, surpassing the cost of really everything else in their life. Paying yourself first looks like still making sure you're prioritizing eating 3 meals a day. That sounds super basic, but there is no way that you can show up as your best self without ensuring that you are eating 3 meals a day and also have a safe, dry, heated, place to sleep every single night. What that might mean from the perspective of sacrifice is that we might have to kind of reconsider what living situation looks like. I have a lot of folks who are in a place of feeling like they're struggling for survival because of a difficult financial situation. And in that struggle, pride and ego also come in. And this is something that is, there's so many emotions around, number one, financial trauma, also kind of anxiety related to money stress that we could spend a lot of time talking about. But pride and ego are really, really hard forces to kind of fight against when you are in that place of survival and you don't want to be there. And what that sometimes manifests itself in is, well, no, I'm still going to be in the 20th floor apartment in the middle of this major metropolitan city, but yet I'm still struggling to make sure that I have enough money to put food on the table so that I'm eating three times a day. Quite frankly, you are not taking care of yourself and what your needs are and the way that you need to show up to be able to kind of give into yourself fully by making that decision. And so that's a clear example where paying yourself first, it can sound great and flowery in theory, but it's also very applicable when you're in a situation of struggle. The other thing that's really important in regard to paying yourself first in a struggling situation is to be able to really be able to ask for help. And in those situations, think about things like debt consolidation or government assistance programs, or even something as simple as asking friends and family for help, not even financially, just hey, could you watch my kids since you work from home? Or, hey, could you drive me to the train station because we leave for work at the same day, or whatever it may be. There are a lot of opportunities to lean on resources, both personal and also broader resources in our communities when you are in those places of struggle. But paying yourself first, it is goal-based, but it's also how can I show up to be my best self? And when you prioritize showing up to be your best self, those decisions become much more clear. And even though they're painful, can actually be really rewarding in the long run. The second part of your question was what trade-offs do we often have to make when we think about paying ourselves first? And the number one issue that I saw with my clients and just in the personal finance space in general is everyone has 11 priorities. I'm the number one culprit of this, right? Everyone has 11, 12, 17 priorities. It's well, I'm going to lose 20 pounds and run a marathon and become a better chef. And I'm going to go to part-time school and I'm going to get promoted in my job. And it's there's so much to focus on at the same time. And I love that for you. Yes, go forth and be great. But when you're talking about actually taking action on those goals and being able to find success in those goals, we have to trim down the number of priorities at the same time. So when it comes to paying yourself first, people often struggle with this because they have 6, 7, even 8 or, more priorities. And it's hard to figure out how to prioritize all of these things and then also have money for gas for my car. Well, the trick here is we actually need to shorten that priorities list, because if you have 8 priorities, by definition, they're not priorities. It's just a list of things that are ideal for you moving forward. And one of the best ways I like to do that is by giving each priority kind of a time-based element to it. So let's say I am saving up for a wedding and my wedding is in May, and that is my priority from now, February until May. I really want to save up for the honeymoon afterwards. That's a good, 4 or 5 month time frame to prioritize just that wedding. And then after that time kind of passes, then it can be time to think about, okay, and also I really want to be able to gift my significant other, a Peloton for Christmas or whatever, then that becomes your next priority or whatever paying yourself first looks like. But I think the hardest part in making those sacrifices is if you don't have a framework to think about like what is most important to you, and there are too many things that are important to you, you start to sacrifice things that don't make sense to sacrifice. Like, groceries. I keep coming back to food, but we need to eat, people. Like, you can't, like, don't just cut down your grocery bill. Like, that is not, I really hate when people do that. Try to trim down the number of priorities. And then from there, be able to make trade-offs in different kind of like distinct time periods.
Yeah. I mean, the best way to talk about it is you can't have your cake and eat it too. It's just not going to happen. But, and that's completely fair. And I just kind of was thinking of another thing too. What about sacrifices or decisions that may not be logical? So I'll give you an example, or like financially logical. So for example, like maybe in my culture, maybe having loans is not really, it's kind of frowned upon. Or, in my personal experience, owning a home is a big deal in our culture. And so maybe I may take money out of my 401k or not be optimizing my investment there and putting that towards a personal goal. And I think to some degree that aligns with what you're saying, right? Like paying myself first, making that a priority. But ultimately, maybe in the long term, that's not serving me well because I'm not maximizing my 401k investment. What are your thoughts there around like, and it doesn't have to be cultural. It could be my personal goal that I'm trying to achieve, but sacrificing in other areas that maybe could serve me better long term. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, what you seem to be getting at, Jane, is this tension between like short-term goals and like long-term financial health. Seems to be kind of like the general tension that you're outlining, and it's actually a huge focus of mine as I'm kind of digging into some of the behavioral psychology of personal finance and what it really means to set yourself up for success. I'll be totally honest. There is a philosophy out there in the personal finance realm that success looks the same for every person. And so every person should be aiming for the same end goal. Every person should be aiming for, 20 years of income saved in your 401k. Every person should be aiming for home ownership at the end of the day. This is probably an unpopular opinion, but I actually don't really subscribe to that philosophy, that there is a distinct kind of set success and measure of success for each person. What you can't do, though, on the flip side, is use and manipulate and like reject that philosophy just for the sake of fulfilling your short-term desires and goals and dreams and say like, well, it's because I don't subscribe to this idea that everyone needs like a maxed out 401k, So there's nuance here, which is like perfect because that's exactly what your podcast is describing. Like there's a gray area where it actually doesn't always make sense to tell someone like, you need to follow this exact script for your life. Mm-hmm. But that's often the easiest thing to do because the alternative is, hey, Jane, sorry to pick on you, but hey, Jane, what is your vision for your life? What does your life look like? What does the museum exhibit of Jane's life 100 years from now contain? Mm-hmm. And culturally, especially comparing Western cultures where we are and other cultures around the world, there's a very wide range of what success looks like and what someone's entire life looks like, especially when it comes to things like retirement or what it means to work or what it means to be close to family or how a family is structured and what the financial obligation is of that family. There's a lot of nuance here. And so when I hear people really struggling with how do I make the right sacrifices? Like, how do I make the right sacrifices in the short term or in the long term that won't basically shoot me in the foot in the long term? I like to dig a lot deeper on well, really for you, what does your ideal long-term look like? I'll use myself as an example. Both Jane and Sabs know this, but I'm like a very big proponent of the early retirement movement. Not as in like, I'm going to be on the golf course every day at 35, but as in like, I love entrepreneurship. I love real estate. Like I just find myself in so many different places, wanting to spend my time in places that are not like a 9-to-5 role all the time. And so given that the structure of my life, what my ideal state looks like is actually being able to have a lot of investments that provide cash flow that will allow me to support that kind of lifestyle once I get into my 40s, early 50s and beyond. That's very, very different than the typical retirement goal where folks plan to stop working at 65 and plan to live off their savings. Just structurally, that means that you prioritize things very, very differently. And so just using that as a brief example, really having understanding of what some of those long-term goals may look like, or even an ideal long-term lifestyle might look like, will provide more clarity when having to make some of those short-term decisions. But unfortunately, there really is kind of no silver bullet here. And it disappoints me that a lot of financial influencers do try to kind of, just portray that there is, because I don't, it's like saying that everyone needs to go to college. Like I know it's a hot take, but like, people are different. We are different. We have different priorities in life. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And why this is such an important topic and why the podcast aligns itself so nicely to this topic, given there is no silver bullet. But I really like how you touched on sort of having that long-term vision and setting that for yourself. So, Les, like in all honesty, when I moved to the States, I was quite lost with this whole investing and what is my vision. So I was lucky that I was recommended a financial advisor to help me guide me in this journey. So in your opinion, sort of when should people look for a financial advisor? What's like important to look out for when picking one? And is it like almost like a therapist where you interview a few to like get to the right one, or what? Can you help us, our audience, guide through that process a little bit more?
Yes, absolutely. And I love that like therapist analogy. Yes, like unhesitatingly, yes, you should be shopping around as if you're looking for, a new primary care physician or a family therapist. Like this is a big part of your life, right? We're designing your lifestyle. And so you want to make sure the person that you're working with is one that you trust and can really collaborate with on those decisions, rather than feeling like I'm overwhelmed and this person is either keeping me in a state of overwhelm, I'm pretending like I'm understanding what they're saying, or they're impatient with me when I'm trying to learn more. Like there's so many red flags when it comes to like finding people that actually care about, how your finances end up. I'd love to use this opportunity to make a couple of different distinctions, which I think is really helpful in finding the right kind of professional that helps you. One is that historically, before kind of the age of mobile applications and other advanced technologies that we've seen really in the 2010s and now 20s, most financial advice and financial management was done through people. People are an incredible asset in that regard, but there are also quite a few resources that are a little bit more kind of modernized and digital that people are leaning to as well. So everything from like a budgeting app to a actually like AI software that invests for you, that all exists out there. And so if you're someone who's like, I don't want to add another meeting to my calendar, I just want good advice, I would highly recommend and can definitely provide resources there that are a little bit more helpful for that on the go type of person. But if you are looking to work with a person, there's really, there's a large number of professionals, but there's kind of three main categories. The first is financial coaches. Second is financial advisors. And the third is financial planners. They all sound really similar, but they're quite different actually in their approach and also their background. Financial coaches, which is my background, is really focused on how does your coach help you to uncover gaps that you have in your current financial situation especially around the foundations, right? So budgeting, savings, debt, some of the psychology around that, really like your therapist, like really, someone that you could meet with on a weekly basis or bi-monthly basis if required. And there are quite a few financial coaches out there, especially in the debt space. If you're struggling with debt, financial coaches are a great resource there. Financial advisors, which is what Sabrina mentioned, are typically individuals that are affiliated with a certain company that offers a certain number of packages or assets that you can actually purchase as products. So that might include things like life insurance, disability insurance, mutual funds. Financial advisors are often people that are kind of like the front of house sales people for those products. And they do also provide some really valuable financial advice, usually on a more like biannual or quarterly basis in terms of frequency. The number one caveat I have here, and financial advisors are absolutely wonderful, especially if you find a great one. There are also financial advisors that do target new grads and new kind of entrants to the US or whoever it may be, offering advice. And their advice is not necessarily bad, but it often ends up in purchasing their products. And so you should just be educated. There's no red flag in using them. They're absolutely wonderful, but just know that they do have kind of a sales-based commission element to their job. And that is part of the driver of the relationship. So insurance policies, mutual funds, other products that their company sells will likely be a huge part of your discussion and talking points. The last type of person is a financial planner. Financial planners are really focused on the investment space, and they are usually not affiliated with certain products based on a company that they represent. Financial planners are more likely to be, their own family office, or they're a one-person shop, and they provide investment advice. They have to go through a series of tests and exams to qualify to be a planner. But they're also a really good resource, especially if you find yourself, growing your net worth and wanting to kind of graduate from some of those more self-help resources. And that's quite a bit to remember, but just in general, to wrap up, there's coaches, advisors, and planners. Each one has a little bit of a different expertise and also kind of different driving forces based on kind of the monetization structure. Absolutely great to work with any of them. Or if you're looking for a more low touch approach, there's a lot of tech around that as well.
Yeah. And thank you for providing that context, because I did not know that myself. So this is actually, this is black and white in the sense that like, it's good to educate, yourself on how they're tied and like what their compensation structure is, just so you're making an informed like decision. But I think where it can be like different for different people is what type of service you actually need. Do you need coaching, advising, or buying a particular product or package, or do you need more planning services? So really appreciate you kind of distinguishing that for us. I want to pivot a little bit, because one of the things you said earlier, it really kind of aligns with what Sabrina and we were thinking and talking through, is around leveraging your community and really leaning on your community. And one thing that I think could really vary, this could be person to person, this could be, culture to culture, but talking about money, talking about finances, sometimes it's taboo. Oftentimes, even, and I know, Lesley, we've talked about this, like even at the workplace, a lot of times people are at a disadvantage when they don't talk about money. And so knowing that there are nuances in culture and background and upbringing, what are your thoughts around communicating with your community or your family around your financial goals?
Yes, I love this question, especially because I find it so ironic, just to be like very vulnerable for a second, that I'm so focused on personal finance in my life. And yet something I struggle with really, really strongly is being able to have these conversations with my family, to be able to have these conversations kind of across cultures and also across generations. And so absolutely, I think that transparency and having these conversations is really important, but I absolutely acknowledge like the difficulty at hand, and I'm going through it right now. I'm going through it. That all being said, my best advice here is to start with close resources. So if you and mom have never talked about money before, you think she might be a little bit like, hesitant or guarded, feel free to bring up the conversation, but just know that generationally, culturally, situationally, like whatever kind of stressors or other factors may be at play, I would keep your expectations kind of tampered to be able to develop those conversations over time. On the other hand, when you start with a source that maybe you have really close relationships with in other areas, so maybe you're often talking about things like health goals, or you're close from a spiritual standpoint and kind of are along similar spiritual journeys, or a partner maybe that you're thinking about moving in with, or, starting a family with. These are all close relations that you can start to integrate these conversations with over time. But the key thing here is that no matter who you're talking to, whether it's grandma, mom, best friend, or significant other, it's going to be over time. So just go in with that expectation there, because I don't want folks to think, oh, I should have these conversations. It'll be so groundbreaking. And then to be disappointed when the first conversation doesn't go well. Actually, that's to be expected. That's to be expected.
Right.
For sure.
Right.
In starting those conversations, I always like to come from a place of learning, and if possible, integrate those conversations into other kind of common topics that you've talked about before. So for example, my lovely husband, who I've talked about many times on podcasts, and I, when we were kind of first figuring out our finances and trying to figure out kind of our real estate strategies, we started our conversations talking about like, so what are your ideal goals? Like, what would be exciting to you? Like what scares you? What are you nervous about? The conversations don't have to start with, I'm struggling with this. Can you help me? It can actually be something much more broad that'll invite someone in and allows them to have a back and forth conversation with you, rather than maybe, you have an agenda and want to educate your younger brother, and you go in saying, hey man, like you got to get this credit card. You haven't done this for 5 years. I've been telling you for so long, really coming in from a place of like collaboration and asking questions in the spirit of learning can be really helpful in this space. Another thing that's helpful to do is always giving kind of a heads up. So I've got quite a few girlfriends that I'm lucky to be quite close to in my city. And there have been times where, a girlfriend will be really struggling with something and say, invite us all to dinner and say like, hey guys, at this dinner, I'm really struggling with this. Can we talk about it together? And that can feel like a great invitation. It's actually increases intimacy in those relationships, and also allows people to start thinking about, well, gosh, how can I really help this person based on my own experience? And every time I've attended a dinner like that, or attended a wine night, or just gone over to someone's house and had those conversations, it ends up being valuable for both parties. So main takeaways here being, one, from an expectation standpoint, this takes time, especially given how different cultures and different individuals have different relationships with money and talking about money. So it takes time. Don't be discouraged if the first conversation doesn't go well. The second main takeaway here being, it is absolutely okay if you come to it from a place of learning. And actually, I'd highly recommend that if you're open to it. Ask questions of each other. And even if you do have a hidden agenda, like trying to get your sibling to finally get a credit card, you can absolutely get there, but approach it from a place of learning and collaboration. And then lastly, if something is you're really struggling with it, try to give a heads up, and give that heads up before the conversation happens, so that the person, one, is not overwhelmed, but also two, they can kind of get over the emotional hump of like, this is a scary topic. I don't think it's appropriate. And then get to the point where it's, wow, Lesley really trusted me to have this conversation with her. I wonder how I can help. And I think those 3 steps will lead to really strong and even more intimate conversations around money.
Yeah, I love that. And it's something that I'm very actively doing. like I'm engaged. And so my fiance and I are talking about how we want to manage money. And sometimes it can be a really difficult conversation because we grew up in different upbringings, and the way we look at money, the way we manage money, the way we've been taught about money is very, very different. And so as you become one household, it's really, you will have those tough conversations. And I think exactly to your point, it will take multiple conversations. You're not resolving the problem in day one, and understand that there will be differences and approaches. So I love that. And I think the one thing I will add here before we close this out is just, I've personally benefited also from being open about money. And again, I know this will be different, and different people will, some people may be uncomfortable with this, but I know, I had, and I'm very lucky to have had a great relationship with my manager previously at work. And I'm able to openly let them know about my financial goals, and that, this kind of relates to promotion. This could relate to end of the year bonuses, or, salary increases. A lot of that, when I find that if I'm more open about my goals, the people around me are more likely to help me. This could be your manager, this could be your peer, your friends, your family. And sometimes you need that, right, to move forward in life and in your finances. So appreciate that you kind of share that, Lesley, because I personally have benefited from being more open, and even though it's uncomfortable to talk about money more. So thank you. And I know we're at time here. So Lesley, the last couple minutes here, where can people find you? What's next for you? We're excited to learn a little bit more about what's next.
Yes. Well, one, I just can't wait to listen to the rest of the episodes on this show. The topic is just so wonderful. So thanks, guys, for having me on. In terms of what's next for me, I mentioned in the beginning, I'm really trying to find and explore better solutions for that tension between kind of short-term and long-term financial goals. And I'm working on a project right now around kind of the behavioral psychology of money and how to take short, fun actions that actually end up kind of creating that better and healthier long-term future. And beyond that, really, I just feel really passionate about this space. I think, speaking of lifestyle design, personal finance helps us really unlock our potential. And for so many people, it feels like, I can't figure out this finance part of my life. It feels like something you should be ashamed of and that you should struggle with alone. And in my experience, once you can open up, like Jane mentioned, just a world of opportunities opens up to you as well. So I'm really, really excited to keep working in the space, and look forward to any questions and potential research buddies that come from this show. And my Twitter handle is at Ihionkhan. It's Ihionkhan. And I'll send that to the host as well, so it's in the show notes.
Awesome. Thank you. We will definitely share that with our audience. And thank you, Lesley, for all the advice and just recommendations today. We really appreciate it. And for anybody who wants to reach us, if you have new ideas, if you want to get connected with Lesley, feel free to also email us at where'sthelinepod@gmail.com. And please subscribe wherever you're listening to us. Thank you. Bye.